So the workshop I'm going to go through today is about setting up debates. I expect this to take about an hour, but we'll see how that goes. Uh, can I check that my screen is visible, that I am sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, we will get straight into it then. Let me move the Zoom chat out of the way. Okay. Logistics-wise, the slides, I will post them on my site. I will also give them to Haman, so that can be circulated among you. The recording will also be circulated once that's ready after the session. Questions, if you do have questions, please do have questions. You can ask them in the Zoom chat. I'll try to answer those as we go along. And also, if that doesn't work for you, you can raise your hand as well. And I'll be able to see that and call on you in a moment. So what are we going through today? So this is my workshop on setting up debates. We'll start by going through what I mean by that and why we should bother with this, some of the basic rules around motion types and modeling fiat, what makes a good model, analysis motions and examples, some other stuff about being opposition, counter modeling, when things go wrong, closing teams, etc. And so that's just a quick outline of what we're going to go through. Starting with what I mean by setting up debates. So the World's Manual says OG has a duty to define emotion. And basically what this means is it's not just giving dictionary definitions of the words in emotion, but also a couple of other things. So for policy motions, we'll get into what these are in a second, how a policy is going to be implemented, and that's what we call a model. And for analysis motions, what something looks like. And this is something that you have essentially a role fulfillment kind of duty to do and around. Why should we bother with doing this? So beyond the fact that this is role fulfillment and something that you should be doing, I think it does also help the debate and help you in a couple of ways. The first is just clarity. So if we look at this motion, this was World's Round 9 this year. This House believes that India should prioritize policies that aim to significantly reduce economic inequality rather than prioritize policies that aim to rapidly drive economic growth. If you just leave the motion as it is, with policies that aim to significantly reduce economic inequality, it's really vague as to what you're supporting or what the motion is about. It would be much better if you can just like name some kinds of policies, some specific policies or a range of policies that you would support as part of the motion. That would make the debate a lot clearer. The other reason why I think it's very good and useful to set up debates well is that it is strategic and it's in your interest to do so. If you model something well, it can make it easier to achieve your impacts. So I think in this motion, for example, if you model in some like education, progressive taxation, etc., then that can make it a lot easier to achieve impacts like actually reducing economic inequality and providing opportunities for a range of people. That's still pretty vague, but it's a very basic example of how modeling can make it easier to achieve your impacts. It can also be very effective at removing opposition arguments from the debate. And this is like one of the best ways to preempt arguments when it works. We'll see some good examples of this later. And there's also some rules-wise limits on how much can be added later after PM or LO. So you can't not model something at PM and then at DPM start coming up with a list of policies and how you're going to implement something. It's a bit late to do it then, and there's limits on how much credit how much you can do that, how much credit you can get for it. So you should do this at PM or LO because the rules demand it for you, demand that you do that, and it's also in your interest to do so. Right. So we mentioned policy motions. This is sort of the first broad class of motions that we debate. An important thing about these is that you do have modeling fiat, so you can decide how a policy is implemented. So what are policy motions? There's two kinds of policy motions. The first is just this House would. That's your traditional policy motion. And there's an active variant of this as well. So if it's this House as someone would do whatever, that is also a policy motion. The second type of policy motion, which is a little bit more confusing, is this House believes that X should do Y, essentially. And the thing to stress about the second version is that not every THBG motion is suddenly a policy motion. It has to fulfill these specific requirements. So it has to be of this form. X has to be an actor, and Y has to be an action, and not just an action, but an action that actor X takes. We'll see some examples in a moment. Policy motions are important to understand because in a policy motion, you have modeling fiat, which is the power to decide how a policy is going to be implemented. And this is something that's distinct from confusingly named general fiat, which is the power to assume that a motion will happen, e.g. that Parliament will vote for the policies that you want to implement. If it's about a group doing something, the group will do what the motion says it'll do. And this is also in addition to your general ability to define words in the motion, which you just have as OG. So a very basic example of this would be this house would ban smoking. It's this house would. You have modeling fiat. You can decide how you ban smoking, how long you're going to do this for, how long it takes for you to implement this, what the punishments are if you don't comply with the law. And this is the modeling fiat that you have in addition to just like the general fiat of assuming that Parliament will ban smoking and being able to define what smoking is. And this is relatively basic stuff that you're probably familiar with already. Right, let's go through some examples. So this is how I check that you're still here and paying attention. This house, so first example, and you can just type yes or no in the chat for whether this is a policy motion or not. This house, as the USA, would significantly reduce the size and power of federal government agencies. Yeah, this is pretty clearly a policy motion. Even though it's an actor motion, it's got would in it, it's still a policy motion. So you have modeling fiat, and here you can decide exactly how you're going to reduce the size and power of federal government agencies. Here's another fairly straightforward example, and this was the world's open quarters this year. This House believes that it is in the interest of the USA to significantly reduce the size and power of federal government agencies. Great, we figured out that this has no fiat. There's no would in here, it doesn't fit into the second category. It is still an actor motion, but now it's about the likely implementation. So both of these are actor motions. The difference is that in the first one, you can choose exactly how you reduce the size and power of federal government agencies. And the second one, you have to actually discuss what the likely implementation is. So you can describe it, but the other side can challenge that, and then you'll have a debate about what this will likely look like and what the impacts of that are going to be. Another one, this is relatively straightforward example. So this was round 9. This House believes that India should prioritize blah, 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 blah. Give you a moment. Yes, this is indeed a policy motion. Even though it doesn't have would in it, it falls into that second category of THBT X should. So that is going to be a policy motion. So what this means actually is if you were in round 9 of Worlds this year, you could pick a selection of policies that aim to significantly reduce economic inequality rather than policies that aim to rapidly drive economic growth. And then the debate will be about those policies that you've selected, providing a reasonable range of policies that fulfills the spirit of the motion. If the CAs wanted to say this without that, they would have to rephrase it. So it could be this House supports India prioritizing blah, 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 or this House prefers that India prioritizes blah, blah, blah. So those would be alternative versions. If you're setting a motion and you don't want there to be modeling fiat, you would have to phrase that differently. Right, slightly more difficult examples. This House believes that Marine Le Pen, so that's the leader of the far-right party in France. Oh, we've got a question. Wouldn't the opposition also have the liberty to counter this? Yes, absolutely. So we'll get to counter models and counter fiat and all of that towards the end. But the fact that this is a policy motion with modeling fiat means that proposition or OG can choose which policies they want to support as long as they are a good selection that aim to significantly reduce economic inequality, and then OP can choose their side. So they're still bound by the fact that there's a rather than in the motion to things that rapidly drive economic growth as opposed to reducing economic inequality, but then OP would be able to define their side and their stance as well. Right, this example, this is not a policy motion. We have correctly identified that. So even though this is in the form, confusingly, this House believes that X should something. There is no modeling for that because the actor, Marine Le Pen here, is being subject to an action, not taking it. So she is not like doing something to unban herself. She is being subject to a ban or unban as a result of government action. If we wanted to set this as a fiat motion, or motion, policy motion with modeling fiat, it would have to be like this House would not ban Marine Le Pen, blah, blah, blah. Final example, which is a little bit more straightforward, also very vague. This House believes that the environment should be protected. Does this have modeling fiat or not? Indeed, this is not a policy motion. So despite there being THVT and should, again, this is like not even an actor this time, it's an environment, and it's an action that's happening to the actor, not something that the actor is taking. So there's no modeling fiat here. And like if you really wanted to set this motion with fiat, you'd probably still want to be a little bit more specific, but you would just set it as this House would protect the environment. Right. It seems like we're pretty clear on this stuff about policy motions. What do I have next? Right. So the other kind of motion, and we've come across a couple already, are analysis motions. So this is basically everything else. This House believes that, this House supports, this House opposes, this House prefers, this House regrets, etc. And in these motions, you have no modeling fiat because they're analysis motions. But you can argue that a specific implementation or characterization is most likely. So that's something that you should probably still do to illustrate how the debate works. But you can't just assert that by modeling fiat now. It is up for debate, and that's something that can be challenged. That being said, these things are distinct from modeling fiat and they still apply. So there's still power to assume that the motion happens, which is general fiat, and you still have general ability to define the motion. So for example, if the motion is this House believes that smoking should be banned, or this House supports ban on smoking, I think these two are basically equivalent. There's no modeling fiat, which means implementation is up for debate. You can argue like how much enforcement there's going to be, what the punishments are. But you can still assume that Parliament will vote for some kind of ban on smoking, though not the how or the details, and you can still define what smoking is. So that covers the two types of motions that we have in BP debating and probably also other formats. You have your policy motions where you have modeling fiat and analysis motions where you don't. Right. Some rules for how modeling and defining things works before we get into some concrete examples. So the really basic principle is that you can model the implementation or how something's going to happen, but you cannot model outcomes. So you can't assert that a policy will lead to the outcomes that you want it to have. So basic example, this House would ban smoking. You can say that we'll fine people who are caught smoking, we'll imprison people who are selling cigarettes. You could give more details of how big the fines are. If you give bigger fines after the first offence, etc. All of that is fine. Those are things that you can model because they're part of the implementation of the policy. What you can't do is you can't say 3 points of setup, point 3, there will be no black market. This is not something you can assert. It's not part of the motion itself. It's something that's up for debate. So you can design policies like very heavy enforcement that reduce the chance of a black market forming, but that's still something that's within the debate, and opposition can try to argue that there will be a black market. Similarly, you also can't just like assert that people will be healthier. You have to argue that, and a good model could help you. If your model is effective in reducing the amount of people smoking, they'll probably make people healthier as well. So that's the distinction between implementation and outcomes. You can model the implementation, you cannot model the outcome, or you cannot assert the outcome. That's within the debate. You can have exceptions, but you don't have to. So if you feel like you need to, you can make exceptions. The thing about exceptions is that they have to be actually exceptions or special cases. They can't be most cases. And you should explain why they're like substantively and meaningfully different. So for example, if the motion is this House would ban cosmetic surgery, you can make exceptions for burns victims. I think this is a pretty special case where like it is just substantively and meaningfully different from most people seeking out cosmetic surgery. You can't be like, exception for anyone who is uncomfortable with how they look. This probably describes most people seeking cosmetic surgery. So you cannot make an exception that just removes most of the motion. That's not a legitimate exception that you can make. Continuing with some rules for defining motions. So this is quite detailed, but generally, as long as you're reasonable, this will not be an issue. So the really big thing in bold is just be reasonable, use natural definitions, consider the spirit of the motion, which is what sort of it was intended as a debate or what a reasonable person would understand debate to be. The context, so what the status quo looks like, any relevant current events, proposals or policies, etc. What you're not allowed to do is this list of silly things. So these are just all unreasonable. If you give reasonable definitions, you won't have to worry about them. But quickly running through these. So you're not allowed to squirrel motions. So you can't make plainly unreasonable definitions that aren't in the spirit of the motion. So if it's this house of banned smoking, it's banned smoking for children or under 18. So that's no. You can't place or time set things. So motions by default take place today, and they also take place all around the world. So you can't say we will ban smoking in developing countries. No, you have to ban smoking everywhere. Although you can argue that maybe developing countries are the most relevant to the debate, they have the greatest impact, or they're the most significant, etc. We will ban. Can we say we will ban smoking when it was invented? No, this is going back in time. You can't prevent smoking from happening. You have to ban smoking in the world that we live in today. So I have a question in chat of if we can we like define a house. So you cannot do this in BP. You cannot do this in WSDC either. I am cautious about other formats since I'm not fully familiar with it. But the house is basically unless it's like an act of motion where you're this house as someone else, it's just like all the governments in the world, essentially. So if it's this house going to ban smoking, you can't just restrict that to India. You can't be like, I defined a house to be the Indian government. That's not something you would be able to do in like a general BP competition. I am aware that in some circuits, there are different rules around this. So, for example, I think if you do debating in the New Zealand school circuit, at one point the default was debates take place in New Zealand. There's specific rules for other formats or other circuits, but in general, debates happen all around the world. You cannot restrict them to specific countries. You can argue that they will have the greatest impact in specific country places. No, you cannot place it to New Zealand. Only under those rules within the specific competition. As much as I would like to do that sometimes. Right. The final thing you can't do here is just an inappropriate level of specificity or abstraction. So if we go back to this motion about India prioritizing a certain set of economic policies, you cannot say that this motion is equal to just we support the rural wage employment guarantee. This is absolutely a reasonable policy that would be part of the debate, but I think the motion does require you to support like a general set of policies to be prioritized and around, as opposed to just one. So this debate, I think, does require you to support a general set of policies. This can be one of them, but you can't just support. You can't just be like this motion is equal to this one specific thing. That might be part of it. All right. We have a question here of if modeling can be questioned, how is this different to proving likelihood? I think we have a slide later on when things go wrong. But I think the difference here is that modeling fiat, when you have it, is something that you are just allowed to do. So as long as you're reasonable, you're allowed to do things. People can question it, but the answer is like, sorry, this is our fiat. So I think we'll see some examples in a moment. But if we go, I go back a slide. Yeah, so if, for example, the motion is this house would ban cosmetic surgery, and you say that there's going to be an exception for burns victims, the other side can challenge this. This is not a very effective challenge because this is a reasonable part of your fiat, and you wouldn't have to say anything more. You don't have to argue that this is a likely exception or anything like that. It is just true by the modeling fiat that you have. In contrast, if it were an analysis motion and it was this house supports cosmetic surgery being banned, you'd probably have to say a line or two about why it's likely that there will be an exception for burns victims. I think that's pretty likely, and a challenge would it be very successful. We'll talk a little bit more later about successful challenges when people haven't defined things reasonably. Right. Those were some rules. Ooh, yes. Uh, Setting aside those rules, which I think can generally be summarized as just be reasonable, don't try to make the debate weird or restrict it to specific cases. Here are like the actual important things about good practices when you are modeling. So the first really big one is you should describe how a policy is implemented. So this is not defining words and emotion or asserting certain sets of outcomes that you want to achieve. It's an explanation of how the implementation would work. So you can imagine yourself as being like the government or a minister or a civil servant or someone who's tasked with writing up a policy and giving people instructions of how to follow it. That's the sort of thing you want in modeling. They should add clarity. So if there's terms that are unclear, which will depend on how much is specified in a motion and info slide, uh, you should add some clarity to what they are. So the questions you can ask yourself here is just what does X concretely look like? What are some examples of it, etc. You can quite often take out opposition arguments that depend on poor implementation. This is a very like strategic and effective thing to do within modeling. And you should generally be brief and prioritize relevant details. So if you're giving a model that's 2 minutes long, uh, this is not good. You should be able to communicate relevant details in 30 seconds, usually. Maybe if the motion's like this house would invade Sudan, then maybe you need like a little bit more than 30 seconds, but generally you want to leave lots of time to make arguments because that's what's going to win your debate in most cases. The opposite of this are all things that you shouldn't do. So you shouldn't assert outcomes. That's part of your arguments. That's not part of modeling. You shouldn't give a bunch of dictionary definitions for terms that aren't needed. There's just no need for this, and it's a waste of your speech time. You shouldn't give excessive detail. It's a waste of time. You shouldn't give a detailed explanation of the model. It could be your introduction. It could be part of your arguments. It's not your model. Point of framing is really just like miscellaneous rebuttal. If this is the case, you should treat it and put it into your rebuttal section or integrate it or drop it if it's not very good. Or pre-argumentative claims, saying what is like the likely use case or the greatest impact or things like that. These can be useful pieces of framing, but they are not a replacement for a model or definitions. But do those good practices in practice. So in prep time, you shouldn't be modeling on the fly. You should devote a little bit of time in prep. So for BP, probably like 30 seconds to a minute after you've identified the main issues in a debate to just talk through the model definition that your team is going to stand by. So how this will work quite often is like a usual structure, I think, for opening teams is like 2 minutes of individual brainstorming, then 2 minutes of sharing ideas, a minute of prioritizing issues and deciding on arguments. And then at some point after that, you should probably spend 30 seconds or a minute just quickly listing through definitions, model, etc. And I'll relate to how you analyze arguments, etc. This timeline will obviously be different for non-BP formats and if you have more prep time. For speeches themselves, generally modeling will take anywhere from 0 to 30 seconds. If there's a long info slide that does the modeling already for you, then you probably just go look at it for the slide. You won't need to add that much more. But usually something up to 30 seconds of just explaining what they're doing. Chronologically, where this comes in your speech, usually it comes after your introduction. Actually, no, it should come after your introduction if you have one. You should probably have a brief introduction. Usually it comes before listing your points. It doesn't really matter if you list your points and then give your model or your stance. I think this is just the usual way around. And it should come before your rebuttal and arguments. So you shouldn't be at 6:30, here is my model, or here is how I define emotion. It should come before most of your speech, i.e. rebuttal and arguments. Right. We've got a question about calling out uncharitable models. I will deal with this towards the end. There is a slide on when things go wrong and how we can deal with it. Okay. So this is just in practice how you would make a reasonable model. Let's look at some examples. So this pained me to write because I don't write terrible models. And I made this one like as bad as it could be without giving myself more pain by making it even longer. So the motion for this example comes from Open Semi-Finals of World Schools 2021. Uh, and the motion is this House would nationalize the research, development, and distribution of pharmaceuticals. To nationalize with an asterisk means to transfer from private or regional ownerships and control to state/government control, ownership and control. I will give us a moment to read through this model and think about why this is a really, really poor attempt at a model. You don't need to blame anyone for it because I wrote this earlier this morning and I made it as bad as I could. Okay. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at this. There is a very large number of problems. In fact, I don't think this model does anything right. Uh, Hopefully you have some ideas. I'll just quickly run through the points that I have. This is reproduced in smaller text. Uh, this is it's really bad. So I don't think any of these definitions are necessary. So this house you should understand if you're doing VP debating. Uh, there's no dispute over what pharmaceutical companies are. We also know what R&D is. We know what distribution is. So all of this is unnecessary. You have wasted at least, I think, 30 seconds of your time running through this. Despite this being really long, so actually the definitions aren't wrong, to be clear. Like you can say that this is the House of Representatives in the UK and regional equivalents. So this is not place set. This is just an example. It's like correct to say that you're the government in this debate, but this is just a waste of time because this is like what everyone should infer from the motion. Similarly to what is given here, I think, as a definition of nationalization or R&D or distribution. Like the definitions aren't wrong; they're just a waste of time. Um, Despite all of these definitions, it still doesn't explain how this nationalization is going to happen. It just says, oh, suddenly these companies will be owned by the government instead of the status quo. There is no explanation of how it's going to happen. There's random hinting of arguments throughout this. So there's this line where it says, this is essential to ensure that medicines are affordable and distributed equitably. This is a really good idea for an argument. It's not part of the model. You take this by taking it out of here, making this one of your arguments, naming it affordability and access, and then run that as a 3-minute argument instead of having this line in your model. There's also just like assertions of outcomes. So I think in this third point here, it just says, we will invent new medicines. This is an outcome that is very much up for debate in the round about who like who is going to get more medicines on Gov or on. It's not something you can just randomly assert. So that's something you have to show. It shouldn't be part of the model. It could be a point later on in your speech. And there's also some like random framing and weighing here. So it's like, this is particularly important for more vulnerable groups, e.g. the poor. Probably true, could be a useful piece of weighing. Is not part of your model. Could be a point of framing somewhere else. It probably fits best as weighing at the end of one of our arguments. So basically everything has gone wrong in this model. You've wasted a lot of time doing all of the wrong things. And a lot of this stuff should go elsewhere, and you still haven't done what you actually needed to do, which was explain how this nationalization works. Right. Hopefully this is like, we understand why there is like no part of this that is good. This is everything going wrong. And now we will see a good model because we want to get good at debating instead of just being subject to bad models like this and random assertions and framing. Yeah, let's see if this works. Same motion. Let's watch a good model from the team. I wonder if this will work. Share sound. Share. Watch 554 to 631. Let me just check if this is audible. Uh, is this audible?
Big Pharma takes advantage of the desperation of
Is the
people
sound
living and
working?
dying to misinform
Fantastic.
people, to neglect them, and to make
This
them
is
pay exorbitant
introduction.
prices for drugs. On proposition, we say it's time to end their tyranny. In this speech, first I'll model the debate, then I'll talk about why we get more accessibility for treatments, secondly, why we get more drugs that wouldn't otherwise be developed, and my third point will be about misinformation.
So far, that's just the introduction and list of arguments. The model starts, as I flagged here, at 554. So I think it would be a good exercise to grab a piece of paper or at least listen to the model closely, and think about what's happening. Because I remember watching this debate as part of a judge test, and I decided this was like one of the most iconic models that I've had. So this is nationalizing pharmaceuticals. Please increase volume. Okay, I will increase the volume and suffer in my own headphones. Yeah, I do also have a transcript of this on the next slide, but I do want us to experience this in action if possible. All right, ready?
3 points of setup in this debate. Firstly, by nationalize, we would buy back companies and compensate the shareholders of those companies. Now the federal government owns these companies. Second point of setup. These national pharma companies would have the best scientists, doctors, and business people that we can hire in the same way that nationalized space agencies like NASA attract the brightest scientists of that country. We might hire people from the old pharma industry, we might attract new talent, but the point is that we have good people working for us. Thirdly, we would publicize what the government is researching and make regular reports on how, for example, the government is allocating funds, which means that our nationalized company would be very transparent.
Right, that is
My
not
first
model
point
anymore.
then is going to be
So that was the model. It was
accessibility.
about 30 seconds. Hopefully you caught it and have had a moment to digest it and think about why it works very well. I'm now going to close that, and hopefully we're back on the slide. Right. So this was the model. I've typed it out here thanks to YouTube transcript. It's very advanced these days. We just added some punctuation. I think this is a really good model. It's among the best I've seen. Why is it good? Lots of green instead of red this time. So it explains how this nationalization would happen. So it's not just these companies suddenly become government owned one day. It's like you actually buy them back and you compensate whoever was owing them, owning those companies so the government owns them. But there's also a little bit more detail as well to how you're going to do this. So you still hire the best people that you can, you make regular reports, and you be transparent and those sorts of things. So those are all parts of the implementation of this motion and how you're doing things. That's useful in adding detail and clarity. What I think is really good about this model is that literally every point here is just removing opposition arguments from the debate. So the first line about buying back companies and compensating shareholders, I think it makes it much, much more difficult to run like a general scaring business deterrence, business confidence kind of case, right? So a very generic op case in a nationalization motion is that there's a chilling effect on new investment if you just like expropriate companies or whatever. Like, but businesses are going to be scared, people are going to be scared, not going to have any more investment going into the future. That argument is much harder to run when the model is you will just fairly compensate people at market value as it is. The second point also removes an opposition argument. So another generic anti-nationalization argument is that you're not going to be able to get the smartest people or the most qualified people, whatever. I think here you just model that you will, or say that you will do this as well as you can. There's a useful intuition pump here around NASA and how they do probably attract the brightest scientists of the country. So this again removes an opposition argument. And a final point, I think, also removes an opposition argument, a generic one about just like state-owned enterprises being corrupt or untransparent or unaccountable or whatever. I think you can model, at least for the start of the implementation, that you're going to have strong requirements to report on what you're doing, make this public, etc. And I think, again, that makes it very difficult or at least much harder for op to run an argument about how the company is going to be corrupt and not transparent or whatever. That's not to say you can't run that argument. You can, and I think op tried to do it. but then you would have to argue why this particular kind of clause or legislation wouldn't last in the long term, that there's still going to be like corporate capture or lobbying or whatever going into the future. And I think that's just much harder to do in the round. So I think where this was very successful is that it's quite clear. It removes like 3 different arguments that opposition can run it around. And it was really efficient at doing so. So I timed this, it was 37 seconds. These are 8 minute speeches, not 7 because it's World Schools. But like it got rid of those arguments very efficiently. It includes useful points and it doesn't have any more fluff on top of that. So I think this is like an example of a very good model in the round. And this is separate from the arguments. So I think I was talking over the arguments, but arguments are like more accessibility for treatments, more drugs that wouldn't otherwise be developed. You stop misinformation from pharma companies. So these are arguments because they're claims about the things that will happen. And then because Gabby, the speaker, was very efficient, she then goes on and runs all 3 of these arguments in a reasonable amount of detail, which I think was quite devastating for all in that round. Right. We have we have a question here of how do we deal with this from all? We will get to this eventually. But basically, I don't think you can really challenge this model because all of it is reasonable. This is a very reasonable version of nationalization. It's a THW motion, so you have fiat to do things. You can argue that you're going to have procedures to hire the best people and do this publicization, at least in the short term. So you can't really challenge the model and be like, this is illegitimate, you're exceeding your modeling fiat or whatever. Well, you can try and do that, but a reasonable judge wouldn't buy it. What you would want to then do as op, with your life being made more difficult, as we will discuss later, is you should counter-model a couple of things. And then you have to rebuild your arguments, essentially, to do off this model and go around it, which is going to be more difficult for you. But that's just what happens when OG does a good model. And this is why you should try to be OG and do good models in this kind of situation to make your opponent's lives more difficult. Right. Here's an exercise. There will be many exercises. I think this is the first one, so you should take a minute or so to have a go at this. This is also from World Schools, different here. This house believes that developing countries should drop local languages in favor of world language as the primary medium of instruction in schools. So I've been yapping for a while. Take a minute or so to think about this, what you would include in the model. You can put some ideas in the Zoom chat, and then I think I typed up some points for this one. We can run through them. That is about a minute. Do we have any ideas of what we want to include? Gradual process of educating the teachers in a mainstream language. Yeah, there's probably some timeline involved with this, so it's not going to take place immediately, but probably want to do this still reasonably quickly if you believe in your benefits. Defining world languages as the ones accepted by the UN as official languages. No. So I think we don't need to define world languages because the motion already does that. So this is an unnecessary definition. Explaining that a world language will make an inclusive society. I think this is an argument that you would make, but it's not part of the model of how you are going to implement this. So if you are giving instructions to the education minister or the school or whatever to do this, the question should be, what are you instructing people to do as part of that, as opposed to what you're trying to achieve? So the model is what you're doing, and then separate to that are your arguments and your outcomes. Mentioned that local languages can still be studied as a second language or elective. Good. This is something that would be smart to include because a very natural op argument is you'll forget your local language, you'll lose your culture, you won't be able to communicate with your parents or grandparents or whatever. I think this can be prevented by modeling something in about still teaching local language fairly effectively. Promote and work. Teachers are given a program, they don't have to pay for it. That sounds good. Yeah, I think we've got some of the details. So what do I have written down here? So what do I have? Most subjects will be taught in world language. So this is what we mean by primary medium of instruction. So maths, science, etc. Will be taught in world language. We want to take a reasonably hard line here, even benefits. So we'll do this pretty intensively from primary school. So this is part of how you're going to implement this. Language will depend on what makes sense for the country. E.g., in India, this will probably be English. It might be French in West Africa. There could be other things in other parts of the world. We'll still teach local languages in schools as a subject, e.g. Singapore's mother tongue policy, which really just teaches local languages very intensively and makes you sit exams in them. You'll still teach local history, culture, politics in the local language. So this addresses the op argument, or makes it quite difficult to run the op argument if people will just forget their language and culture. And we'll implement this fairly quickly with as much resources and effort to train teachers, create resources, etc. Yeah. So I think this is probably about 30 seconds if you read this out. I wasn't timing myself. But I think this is the level of detail you want for this motion. You want to make it clear like what you're doing. Like this is no subjects, it's from primary school. We'll do this pretty intensively. The language will depend on the country. You'll still teach local language because you want to take out that op argument and something about implementation. So I think this is roughly what you want to have. Not too much more, because then you're just like taking time away from being able to make arguments. And then from this, once you've set out the debate, you can make your arguments. So maybe the arguments would be things about, I guess, like economic benefits. There could be educational benefits. There could be within a country, interracial, interlinguistic relations benefits, etc. But those are arguments. They're not part of your model. And the model is just about how you're going to implement this. Right, so that was an exercise. What do I have next? Okay, next we go on to analysis motions, so ones without modeling fiat. There is a certain subset of these which are really about policies, but you just don't have modeling fiat for them, so you might have to explain why something is likely or not. So the same kinds of principles apply to modeling. You should describe the implementation. You do want to prioritize doing this. On top of this, you might need to add or argue why things are likely or not. So this is a slightly trickier example that was set at an in-person tournament in France. I think this is a lovely motion. And it is also one that is relatively demanding on teams to set up the debate. So throughout its history, France has had 5 republics with different constitutional arrangements, e.g. the powers of the executive and the legislature, the relationship between them and how each is elected, generally drafted by an assembly and or approved by a referendum. Some fun facts about past republics of France, and the motion is this House believes that it is time for the 6th Republic of France. I'll give you a moment to think about this, not too long since I think this is fairly difficult, and then I'll run through, I think, the points that you want to include in this particular. Well, it's not a model because it's not this house would redraft the French constitution or this house believes that France should redraft into the 6th. So you still have to argue about what's likely the case. But even then, I think you want to describe what the 6th Republic is going to look like. The info slide hints at some things, but you should describe, I think, what the powers of that executive and legislature, etc., actually are. Right. What did I have written here? Yeah. So even though this is a somewhat lengthy info slide, I think it's like very much unclear what the motion actually means, and this is something that will be down to you as a team. So I think the points that you want to include here is that this is about redoing the constitution. So we'll have a constitutional convention, citizens or representatives with resources and supporting its right to constitution. which would then be voted on and presumably pass. So that's what you're doing. I think some expectations about what might come out of this is that we would expect a weaker president who generally can't override parliament and probably proportional representation as the voting system. I would probably just leave it like that in a model. If you wanted to, you could give a line about this being like the norm throughout Europe, why it's what people generally expect, or you can just like explain why this is the likely outcome in your arguments or when you're challenged, if the other side decides to challenge this. I think the strategic thing for Op to do in this round and actually challenge particular why these things are bad. And then you can insert some lines about what Op has to stand for as well. So this is quite useful to bed and push. There is no which means Op can't countermodel, and then you can just push that. So Op has to stand as a status quo for all parliament, e.g. Article 49.3. I think it's the one where if you think that a policy is essential to the financial well-being of the country or get passed, whatever, you can just force it through in France. If Parliament votes against it. Single-member constituencies with top two runoffs. That's how you elect both the Parliament, lower house of France, and the president. So again, this is relatively short, about 30 seconds. It doesn't make any claims about outcomes, like being more representative of the people, or having more faith in the political system, or protecting minority rights more, or having better policy. That's just what is going to happen as part of this motion in the Sixth Republic of France. And it does it like fairly effectively and adding additional clarity to the debate as well, on top of like a bit of stuff on top too. Right. This slide is a similar example. This one is here because this is a pet peeve or campaign of mine. I think teams should generally support all oppose things fully instead of trying to run to the middle. So example here, which was not set in this form, I think can be, is just this house opposes central bank independence. And this example, what would you do in setup? Say what you actually mean by independence. So I think this would just, by reasonability, mean operational independence. So how to achieve targets, e.g., setting interest rates to achieve inflation targets. Is my connection still good? Am I breaking up a little bit, or am I generally a little bit laggy? I might turn off my camera then. Hopefully that makes the connection a little bit better. If I cut out or freeze or whatever, let me know and I'll run through something again. The slides generally fairly comprehensive. Right, I will turn off my camera. Right. What else would I include here? So I think this is one of the motions where you can support an alternative. So you would just say here that you prefer central banks to be government run, e.g. the Bank of England pre the state, or the People's Bank of China. Examples are useful, I think, generally. And I've added this line of like, there'll still be experts, e.g. the civil service, giving advice. It's just that the government will make final decisions, like with ministries and departments. And I think this is a very reasonable characterization of what the alternative would be. And it also takes out the op argument around just, oh, these are going to be idiots with no economic experience. They're not going to know what they're doing. I think that's like quite plainly unreasonable. And if you model this out or like get rid of it in the setup quite early on, there's not going to be that problem. And you can also, I think, burn and push a little bit on op. So you could say that op must defend independence, even if this is proven status quo. If a government can heavily influence central bank decisions, appoint or fire leadership on policy issues, or regularly change its objectives, that just is not independence. And I think this is a very reasonable understanding of what independence is. So it is true that sometimes status quo can be of government. In those sorts of cases, like this example, you should support things properly or oppose things properly instead of just trying to run to the middle and making for a mess of a debate. Here's a slightly different one. I don't think I've written this one up, but not all analysis motions are policies in disguise. They can be about narratives or fluffier things. This one. So this is, I think this is round 5 of HWSI 2021. So this house opposes the narrative that parents should prioritize the interests of their children over their own. I'll give us a minute or two to think about this. Obviously, this is not policy or modeling fiat motion, so you can't, there is no policy here to propose. But I think you should still describe what this narrative is, and I'll give us a minute or so to think about that. Any thoughts on how we can set up this debate? So we've got some suggestions. This most likely happens after children is nearing and past adulthood. Parents would save less money for children post inheritance, not establish trust funds, but instead travel, learn hobbies, and do things for themselves. I think this is framing. This is not a setup of what this narrative is. Um, yeah, I think that third point is more about setup. Yeah. So what the setup would do here is I think you want to describe what this narrative is, essentially. And then after that, you can do framing, make arguments, whatever. So basically, what do you say? This is a narrative that, or this is pretty widespread narrative or expectations that parents should prioritize doing good for their children before doing good for themselves. Involves things like sacrifice, involves things like maybe taking your children to school, to other kinds of activities, when you could be spending that time on yourself and traveling or pursuing your own hobbies. It means maybe working longer hours so you can pay for things for your children, or all of that. So I think that is a characterization or a setup or some definitions of what this narrative is. I will type that out afterwards. I don't think I've done it on the slide since I wanted to leave it as an exercise. Those are useful things to characterize this motion, right? I think you would also add that this is portrayed throughout media and society. So in films, generally the good parents are the ones who do a lot for their children, even at the cost of themselves. Others are generally seen as bad and neglectful. In conversations between parents, this is an expectation that people should be following, otherwise it'll be social sanction. If you want to, you can add some alternatives. So alternatively, without this narrative, I think you strike more of a reasonable balance. So you should look after your children and care about their interests, but it's also legitimate to care about yourself as well. So you shouldn't be spending, you don't need to spend all of your free time making sure your kid is doing homework or going to sports or whatever. Do some of that, but also take some time to do self-care and look after yourself. So I think those are examples of how you would characterize this or set up this definitionally. And then afterwards, you can make some framing arguments about who this affects the most, how parents are going to be better off, how children are going to be doing a bit better off, etc. Right. Hopefully that is clear. Is this coercive? I think this is a good question. I think part of that's in the model, but the rest of it's probably an argument. Um, yeah. Okay. So describe what this narrative is. I think some concrete examples of what the trade-offs that parents are making is useful, where that narrative is coming from is useful, and what the alternative might look like is also useful here. So modeling and setup. The point of this slide is that modeling and setup is not just restricted to policy motions. It's also not restricted to analysis motions that are really just about policies. Even narrative and fluff motions benefit from clarity and setup, and that can make it easier for you to make arguments as well. So I think if you established, for example, some of the trade-offs between just going after your children all of the time versus taking a bit of time to do self-care, I think that makes it much easier to make an argument about parental welfare and the flow-on impacts that might have on children as well. Right, hopefully that is clear. Um, Another kind of motions under analysis is retrospective motions. So this House regrets, this House prefers the world. In these situations, on top of doing your definition, if you're OG, you need to answer this question of what the counterfactual is. Otherwise, you're not really defending anything. I've got two examples here. I'll briefly run through them. So the first one from Glasgow Ancients this year is the right to privacy argument, and this was set in a couple of other places and variations as well. Right to privacy arguments assert that the state should not interfere in the private lives of individuals. This House regrets the use of right to privacy arguments to advance social causes, e.g. abortion rights, LGBT rights, whatever. So obviously, what you stand for on OG is you don't do this, or you don't use this particular kind of argument nearly as much as has happened in the status quo. But because this is a retrospective debate, the world diverges at some point in the past, and we want to consider an alternative world where we don't really use these kinds of arguments. You want to illustrate what the alternative is going to be, or what you think it is. This is still up for debate, but it really helps to actually make a claim about what you think that is. So I think it could be a basket of alternatives, which you then name. I think more interestingly, and I think this would be what I would try to run, is I think I would assert that the alternative is likely to be trying to address some of the arguments directly or to make positive claims. So in a case of like LGBT rights and gay marriage, if the argument against this is it is not natural, then you would respond with explanations of how this is natural, supported by like scientific studies and other animals, etc. If the argument is that this is unfair to children, then you would unpack that argument and go through, for example, why this is like obviously no worse than single parents, that children still have the same life and practical outcomes and so on. So I think that's one way you can set up the counterfactual in this debate. I think is a very interesting stance that I've just gone through, which could be quite promising for certain kinds of arguments on Gov. That being said, you can pick what the counterfactual is. You should try to illustrate one. If not, then I don't know what you're arguing for. Another kind version of this is the House prefers the world, where the divergence tends to be like pretty far in the past. So this is relationship crystals that hover above people's heads and reflect how they feel about anyone that they're talking to at a moment, and you can't cover them. This House prefers the world where everyone has relationship crystals. I think this one, the important thing to mention in your model is that this is just a different world, which means that a lot of social expectations and norms are likely to evolve differently. So, for example, it probably wouldn't be seen nearly as rude if you have your crystal saying that you're annoyed when someone has approached you, because this is something that just happens very frequently, and societal norms have to evolve differently to account for that. So I think that is probably part of the model or the set. Oh, well, the setup here. I would usually, when it comes to these kinds of motions, I would describe them briefly, maybe give a very brief 1 or 2 sentence explanation of likelihood. If that likelihood is challenged, then you can go on to explain that in more detail or as part of your arguments or whatever. Right. The comparative is status quo, right? Yes. Yeah. So, and this House prefers a world the comparative is status quo or a world without the thing. Yeah. Right. And I think the slide mentions it as well. Okay. This is the first of the opposition slides. We're nearly done. Thanks for sticking around. So this answers what can you do on opening opposition when prop has done a good job, basically, or what you can do in general. So if it's a policy motion of modeling fiat, you can countermodel. And what that means is just putting forward a set of alternative proposals that you want to stand by. That is optional. You don't have to countermodel, but you can do so, and it can be strategic to do so. In general, so regardless of whether it's a policy motion or not, OO should outline what they stand for. So in maybe that narrative motion about the parents prioritizing their children over themselves. Op would also want to describe this narrative, maybe challenge what this narrative actually looks like, and outline that at the start of their speech. And also in general, you want to be careful with forced comparatives. So language, quite often motions will force comparative on op. So things like as opposed to, rather than, instead, price, etc., or force op to defend a specific comparative instead of some other alternative that they might want to stand behind. In those situations, you can't really countermodel because the comparative is forced onto you. The rules for countermodels then is that there's just two big things. The first is that they have to be mutually exclusive with the motion. So if it's just education or raising awareness or those sorts of things, this is not mutually exclusive. Both sides can stand for it. It's not a countermodel. So it actually has to be mutually exclusive, so it can't exist at the same time as the motion. The other thing is you can only use the same amount of political or financial capital that government side has. So if the motion is this house would ban smoking, I think there's some amount of political and financial capital to do that. On opposition side, I don't think you get to do something that would require a lot more effort. So I don't think you get to, I guess, like have a really well-funded rehabilitation program for everyone who has ever smoked, R&D into making cigarettes more less damaging and more enjoyable. Like I think that's stretching the sort of stuff that you're able to achieve. So run through an example. So this came up as a question earlier. What can we do in this motion when you've hit that really good OG and they've modeled this in the way that they've described. So in this motion, as with any motion, you don't have to counter model. So you have the counter fiat to do it because it's this house would. You don't have to counter model because that's optional. But I do think it's strategic to like counter model a few things in this debate. So what might you think about? You probably want medicines to be reasonably accessible and affordable. So I think one point in the counter model would just be that like you still have state-run healthcare services, as e.g. countries with them. You probably still have like bulk buying from states. So New Zealand does this. I feel like NHS probably does this. It's probably true in other parts of the world as well. You have states that bulk buy medicines and subsidize them for the poor. And I think that probably goes a fair way into what's it called? Achieving a lot of the sort of access and price stuff. And this is something that you would only be able to do at Hello, and I think it would be fairly effective. What else might you include? So I guess you still have to support sort of some level of privatization and profit. So I guess what you would probably do is support basically patent law as it is. So patents last for a certain amount of time, but after that, it's in the public domain. You would still allow generic medicines and alternatives to be produced as long as they don't infringe on patents. You probably still have a lot of state-funded research that is just for the public good, e.g., I guess the AstraZeneca vaccine that came out for COVID, etc. And what these things would do in a counter model is it means that you can still stand for a set of policies that probably do a fairly good job of getting to some of the outcomes that you want to show. And then after that, you can go on to debate and argue those outcomes. All right, any questions about that before we move on? Yeah. Right, brief slide on when things go wrong. And this is brief because I think what happens quite often is people over-focus on challenging definitions or this kind of situation where it's much more common for definitions to just be a bit vague or a bit bad, in which case, well, you can criticize the definition and then also utilize it effectively. So what can you do when things go wrong? You should ask for points of clarification. You can do this on OO, you can do this on CO. And generally, as a rule of thumb, like you can do this as soon as the model's been given and we're past the minute. It's good practice to take these. It's probably in your interest to take them because they could be like relevant questions. And if not, you've lost the ability to model because you didn't do it at PM. So that's a useful thing you can do to clarify this. So you can ask POIs, and this is one of the special cases where you can actually hint out what you're going to do. You can be like, clarification, point of clarification, and that's a reasonable thing to you can do. When definitions are actually unreasonable, which is pretty rare, you should point this out. And then your options are basically, you can replace them. And this is something you can only do at hello. Or you can debate them anyways if you think they're debatable. You can also do this as part of an even if argument. But more generally, you should just broaden the debate back to the spirit of the motion. So you shouldn't over focus on the unreasonable definition, point out what a more reasonable definition might be. But don't spend like 5 minutes of your speech doing that. Get that done in 30 seconds and then go on and run arguments anyway about what the motion should really be about, or whatever Gov's made it about, if that's what you've chosen to do. And the thing here is, like, don't spend too much time on this. It's very easy to get bogged down in definitional challenges. Generally, you still want to prioritize making arguments and get this through quickly. Unreasonable definitions are rare. Clarifications are generally useful. You are allowed to add some detail later on in the debate, but there's limits on how much you can do this. I'll add a quote from the Rules Manual where basically you can't backload a model and you can't benefit from that. So you can add some detail, but it's much more limited beyond PMLO, the sorts of details that you can add. Right, closing teams. Some brief remarks here for closing teams who are doing BP. They are bound by models and countermodels. So if OG models something and OO countermodels something, CG has to support that model. CO has to support the countermodel. However, if it's an analysis motion, you can debate the likely implementation or outcomes. And this characterization of what things looks like, how that leads to certain kinds of implementation and outcomes in analysis motions is quite often a great area for extensions. So I guess like thinking back to the France motion, if OG only argued one area of the debate, like proportional representation and why that's good, it's quite strategic for CG to be like, oh, I think this debate is a bit broader. It probably also involve making the president not super powerful, and here are the reasons why that's good. That would be like a very useful thing to add at closing an area for extension material as well. Right, I think that takes us to the end of this. We're not too much over an hour. The summary is basically just please do set up debates. This is not framing or making arguments or those sorts of things. It is just what a policy is, or in the case of analysis motions, what you're standing behind. And the reason why you should do this is it makes debates better, but it's also strategic and in your interests as well. Are there any questions before I wrap this up? I'll give us a moment for that. Yeah, just a few things before we wrap up in case there's any questions. Yeah, I was just going to say, I will post these slides at some point, maybe with a few more things that have come up and around on my website. So that's the link to where I will post these slides. This will probably be a little bit later, like tonight or tomorrow, when I add a bit more detail to places where people have raised things. Yeah, they will be there. I'll also give them to Haman to circulate through everyone. The recording, I don't have it. I presume someone else has it and will circulate it as well. I'll also post a link to that when I get it. The final thing is, before I answer any more questions that we might have, as you might be aware, so this is personal promotion, I am a prospective DCA for EUDC 2026. So if you think that I'm any good, please do submit some feedback as well on this form. That would be really appreciated. Right, I can see one question in the chat. Keep the questions coming. I will answer those questions. Otherwise, I think that will be all for today. Okay, a couple of questions. First question. In a modeling debate about economists replacing politicians or economic policies, will it be fine to just fiat that we will have various types of economists that care both about poor and the economy, or will that be uncharitable? So if this is a policy motion where you have policy fiat, so if the motion is something like this House would put economists in charge of economic policies instead of politicians, I think this is a motion where you have a fair amount of fiat in defining who these economists are, what kinds of things they prioritize. So you could say, as part of your model, we want a diverse range of economists from like different schools of economics with different priorities, e.g., economic growth, helping the poor, etc. So I think this is something that you can fiat in that particular version of the motion. For good measure, in case your judges like don't understand how setting up debates work, you can also add a few lines about why this is likely as well. Generally, people do value diversity in economic thought. This is a more likely policy that's going to be passed because the government also cares about the poor. At least one party is likely to care about the poor. That's how you get broader buy-in, etc. So if it was this House would do this, you would have the fiat to do that. If it were not modeling, so this House believes that economic policy should be made by economists instead of politicians, or this House supports economic policies being made by economists instead of politicians, or so on, you would not be able to assert that by fiat. So then you would have to go and explain why it's likely that there is some level of diversity. So maybe this is that's something that's be within the debate. It could just be that there's lots of different schools of economics. It could be that different universities and economics departments tend to prioritize different things. It could be that economists are academics who do want to read broadly, et cetera, et cetera. You would have to then argue why that's likely. So the short answer is if this were what's it called? A policy debate where you had modeling fiat, I think you could do it. It could be useful to add a line or two about why it's likely anyways, after flagging that you do have modeling fiat, just in case the judges don't understand how debating works. But if it's not, if we're an analysis to that, you have to explain why that's more likely. All right. Right, more questions. What's the deadline? If you want to submit feedback for EUDC, I think the deadline is the end of this month, but any point would be appreciated. Can you please explain what you meant by being careful with comparison as opposed to modeling? Yes. So yeah, what this means is basically if a motion uses this kind of language and it forces a certain comparative onto op, so if it's this House would do A instead of B, or this House prefers A to B, then gov has to stand for A, op has to stand for B, op cannot counterprop a third option C. So I think a basic example of this would be, I guess, this India economy motion. In this motion, op has modeling fiat, but they have to support some set that fiat extends to selecting a reasonable set of policies that aim to rapidly drive economic growth. So you would be bound to this in your modeling. You can't counterprop a mix of the two things. You can't counterprop another option. You're bound in this particular debate to that. So that's just how phrasing works. Similarly, if it's just this House prefers something without an alternative, op has to defend the status quo. So there's no counter fiat there. You have to defend the status quo. So what this line means, I'll add a little bit of detail, is just sometimes the comparative is fixed. In those situations, the fiat is limited in terms of what sorts of things you can support. Right. If a model at opening is uncharitable, can you give a different one at closing? So this is sort of a when things go wrong situation. So there's a couple of things going on here. If opening just makes a model that's like kind of bad and vague, but not undebatable. So maybe they say, I don't know, maybe opening runs something like this. Unfortunately, the rules of debating say that you can only model at PM and LO. You can't model later on. So if your opening comes up with this thing, which is like, it's not wrong, it's just bad in a sense that it's very vague and it doesn't do anything useful, you're unfortunately bound to this. You can add a little bit of detail, but at that point, you probably have to argue why something is likely or why it's a reasonable interpretation of the motion. So if your opening does this, at CG, you could probably say like, come on, guys, let's be reasonable. There's still going to be compensation for the companies or the people who own them when they're going to be nationalized. This is how nationalization usually works, e.g., example. This means that that particular argument doesn't stand. I think that's something that you can probably do in this situation. You can add more detail later on, but there's still a limit to that, and you certainly can't fiat that detail. The only situation where you can actively knife your opening is if they've given a model that is just completely unreasonable. And these situations are just like quite rare, so you shouldn't be overly excited at this. What sorts of situations are this? So if it's this house of ban smoking and OG says they'll ban smoking for under 18s, I think it's legitimate for CG to get up and be like, sorry, OG was like completely unreasonable here. We are going to ban smoking for everyone. That's when you can knife your opening. Or this, you can be like, we will ban smoking everywhere. No, we will ban smoking today because that's what the rules of debating demand. But unless you're in this kind of situation, you cannot like actively knife your opening and give an actively conflicting implementation. That being said, if it's not a fiat motion, if it is an analysis motion and there's like a challenge as to what the likely implementation is, you can just give like other things. So I think in the France motion, where are we? If OG says, well, if OG doesn't say anything, you can add all of this at CG. You just have to explain why this is the likely situation. This is likely because this is just how we write constitutions. The info side also says this is generally what happens. We have to have a referendum because that's the only way things are seen as democratically legitimate. There's a pretty big expectation on democratic legitimacy at the moment. This is likely because Macron is really unpopular. All of the political parties agree that he shouldn't really be able to do this. People generally support that as well. There was a weird historical quirk in 1958 when they came up with this, right? So in an analysis motion, you could add all of this detail and just explain why it is likely. Right. Thank you for the session. Thanks for coming. Hopefully this was useful. I will continue answering questions, but if you don't have questions, you are free to go. What was the next question here?